Most of us have a very clear picture of how we're going to show up in our business. We're going to be consistent. We're going to back ourselves. We're going to make decisions from clarity rather than from panic. And then something happens, a slow week or a quiet launch or a moment of pressure. And the version of us that shows up is a bit different from the one that we had in mind in a way that's just enough to keep us from building on what we've started. That's what this video is about. So maybe you miss a week of posting content and instead of looking at why, you just catch up and you carry on. You've said your standard was consistency, but when that didn't feel possible, you moved the goalposts without quite noticing that you'd done it rather than making a grounded decision with a real why. Maybe you adjust your pricing because someone said no, and not because you've done some kind of considered review, but because the discomfort of holding it felt harder than the cost of dropping it. Or you look back at the last few weeks and realize that most of your decisions have been made from whatever the week was throwing at you because you felt doubts and pressure that made you change course, shrink back, or stop what you intended rather than from any kind of deliberate thinking. None of that is a character flaw. It's what happens when we hold ourselves to a version of ourselves that we've imagined rather than one that we actually know. And there's a difference between those two things. Hi there, I'm Lyndon. Welcome back to this channel about entrepreneurial leadership for women in online business. I have been in online business one way or another for nearly a decade now. And I'm here to share what I've learned, including the hard lessons, with the intention of helping your path be more straightforward. So subscribe if that sounds good, and let's get into it. So here's what's actually happening. When we want something to go a certain way, we tend to idealize how we'll behave to get there rather than looking at it honestly. I know there are so many times that I have believed I'm going to work out 5 times a week starting Monday, and it's never happened. That pattern can show up in business too, and it's not a flaw, it's a hope and intention that's helping us envision the path ahead, and that's useful. But there's a piece between that and then the bit where we find out we're not living up to that plan, and it's a crucial bit because it's the piece that stops us galloping down the, well, I can't stick to anything, I'm not consistent path. If we want to be the consistent, grounded, self-led version of ourselves, the piece that's often missing is that we need to build ourselves from the ground up, as it were, rather than expecting to hit the jackpot first swing, which leaves us with only one option if we don't, and that's feeling like a failure. Meaning, if the standard that you're holding yourself to is fueled by perfectionism rather than self-knowledge, grace, and ultimately self-trust that you're going to keep taking steps forward, regardless of how baby steps they are, you're the one making things harder than they need to be. Not your business, not social media, not the economy, not the fact that you invested in coaching and didn't see the financial ROI that you wanted. These might be external factors that have had an impact or have an impact, but it's an impact that you can deal with if you give yourself a chance. So the invitation here is to ask if you're being or have been too hard on yourself, because in my experience, both personally and through working with and speaking with and reading the content of so many women in the online business space, I don't feel like I'm going out on a limb to say yes. Often the version of ourselves we're measuring against isn't realistic, it's aspirational. Your envisioned self is operating without the friction that you're still navigating. She doesn't feel the pull to change course when results aren't patchy. She doesn't price drop under pressure or soften her message when she's not sure it's landing. She is the idealized version, and we keep measuring ourselves against her and finding ourselves short. That's not to devalue who we actually are, far from it. The opposite, in fact. The whole point is to recognize and trust that the business owner that you're building is the right one for your business, because the figment of your imagination is based on something we've been conditioned to believe is possible, but isn't. This isn't about not striving to be the best version of yourself. This is about not thinking a perfect version is possible. Aspirational perfection is contrary to the human experience. Human perfection is as you are, but that's a conversation to go deeper into another day. For today, the result of measuring ourselves against a fictitious situation is a cycle that is genuinely hard to break, because every time we don't measure up to the idealized version of ourselves, we don't take stock of what actually happened and build from there. We start again. We tell ourselves we'll do better, we'll try harder, we'll start Monday. We picture the idealized version again and we go around once more. And because we're always starting from that imagined version rather than the real one, nothing gets a chance to actually build because we keep dropping back. I did this for years. The version of me I was trying to be in my business was so far ahead of the version that I'd actually developed that I kept just setting myself up to fall short. It wasn't that I lacked commitment, nor was it because I'm not up to it. It was because I wasn't willing to accept that how I actually behave when things get uncomfortable was legitimate and that needing to grow is acceptable. I thought I should be doing better because I was imposing the standard of how I intended to behave. And until I recognized that disconnect, I couldn't change anything real because I didn't know what I was actually working with. What changes this isn't trying harder to live up to the ideal. It's bringing the honest version of yourself into focus and knowing that that honest version is fine. And then looking at what you actually do when results are thin, when doubt gets loud, when the pressure comes in, not to feel bad about it, but because that's your real starting point to develop from. And you can build from where you actually are then. When you've done this work, when you've looked honestly at how you actually behave under pressure rather than how you intend to behave, and you've accepted it, which I know is hard for recovered perfectionists and A-type personalities. When you do, something shifts in how you respond to difficult weeks. You have a slow revenue month, and instead of immediately questioning everything and yourself, you notice what you're feeling and you look for what's actually true and make a decision from that place, not from panic or desperation or shame, not from the imagined version of yourself who somehow never has slow months or a bad hair day. You do it from what you actually know. I actually just had to do this exercise in practice this morning. I was looking at some data and the initial temptation was to pick faults. But through actively not doing that and instead knowing and trusting enough now to work through it without unnecessary emotional charge, the next step was quite clear. It's quite straightforward and it's just part of the job of being a business owner. So maybe you go into a sales conversation and you feel the pull to discount, to over-explain, to make things feel easier, but you don't do it, not because you've suppressed the feeling, but because you know it well enough to recognize what it is now. It's discomfort, it's not data. So you stay with what you know your offer's worth. And gradually things build, not because you become an idealized version of yourself, but because you've stopped stopping and started building from where you actually are. That's a different and steadier experience of business. So the key shift that I would like you to take from this video then is this. Inconsistency isn't coming from a gap between where you are and where you want to be. It's coming from measuring yourself against a version of yourself that you've imagined rather than one that you actually know. Not a lesser version, a greater version actually, because you actually exist. And the way out of that cycle isn't to try harder to reach the ideal. It's to be honest about your actual starting points and build from there. So to something to ponder and journal on this week, think about the last time that you didn't behave the way that you intended to in your business. Maybe you didn't go live every day for 30 days as you intended to. Don't judge it, but look at it honestly. What was actually happening? Maybe it was out of your comfort zone to do that and you can work up to it. Or maybe it was never going to happen and you just somehow thought it should. So it wasn't coming from your own thinking about your direction or strategy anyway. The point is, What does it tell you about where you genuinely are in your business? Because that's the version of yourself that you can actually work with and build from. If you want a structured place to begin your entrepreneurial leadership work, recalibrate your 30-day practice to confident decision making is where I'd point you to first. I created it for women who know their business and know that more strategy isn't what they need right now. The link's in the description to the video if you want to check it out. In next week's video, I'm going to talk about something closely related to this. We're going into the specific experience of already knowing the answer, but not trusting it. If you've ever had a clear sense of what a decision needs to be, but then you overrode it anyway and went looking for confirmation elsewhere, that's what we'll be getting into. It's a topic I recognize very well, as are all these things that I bring up. If this way of thinking about business is useful to you, subscribing is the simplest way to make sure that the next video finds you, and I would love to see you there. A like on your way out the door too would really help other business owners find this video. And if you have questions or comments, you're very welcome to leave them below. I would love to know which part of the video spoke to you the most. In the meantime, bye for now.